Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. This week's hiatus isn't as big as last week's, but I still had a lot of work on my hands and on my shoulders. So here I am, hoping for a Sunday Power On newsletter by Mark Gurman to recontextualize all the iPhone 17, 17 Air, 17 Pro rumors we have covered in the last video. Today we are going to be talking about those devices, but in a slightly different fashion, a very nerdy fashion, a very processor focused fashion. That's the main topic of today. I do have one small video I would like to react to. It's from Drew from Talos of Tech. I asked him on Twitter for permission. He never responded. I did react to him in the past, so I'm taking that as passive confirmation under fair use. I stop the videos anyway all the time and stuff like that. So, and of course, as always, I'm open to any kind of suggestions you guys have, any topics, any discussions, any opinions you might have. Before we get fully started, like the video, subscribe to the channel, share the video out with anybody who you think might enjoy it, and of course, comment. Shout out already to Max Maximus saying, yay, something to spice up my gym visit. Absolutely, man. Good luck, good success at the gym. And Angelica, so two of our three MarkTech Pro Max supporters saying this is a good start into the weekend, and it's a good opportunity to enjoy our time together. Couldn't agree more. Guys, you can see there's plenty of ways to support the channel directly, indirectly. Shout out again to the channel members here like Maximus, Angelica, and Steve, I believe, who are MarkTech Pro Max supporters right here on YouTube. You can also become a supporter over on Patreon. And as Max Maximus already did, you can leave a small super chat or a super sticker as a small donation as the stream gets going. It will be guaranteed that I read out your message. All that fun YouTube jazz, basically. So, but without any further ado, I would like to get into the topic of today's conversation, and that is processors. Now, I know that a lot of us care very, very much about what chips exactly is Apple using? Like, what is basically the intellectual property, the generation of chip design and architecture? What node from TSMC or maybe some other company they might be employing? Over the last few years, it's definitely been TSMC only, but they have also utilized Samsung in the past. And of course, when they were still making Intel chips, they were relying on Intel foundries. So obviously, any new news from the likes of TSMC is a big deal. Any kind of reference to a specific processor is a big deal. So I would like to cover that with you today. YTKR joining the chat saying, don't you think yearly MacBooks is a bit too much to the only good benefits is the previous models get discounted? Forget to say hi, Mark. That's okay. You don't have to say hi. Just give me your opinion so we can discuss things and stuff like that. I hope over the weekend I can set up like a Discord or something like that. So I don't know if we have enough live callers to make it worthwhile, but maybe we'll check something out. I know right now it's a very, very dry season for Apple news or tech news in general. Like there are like some stuff like the recent leaks for the Galaxy S25 Ultra that I would very like to briefly cover, but there's barely anything real to talk about here. So whenever I do make my videos, this is why I wait a little bit longer. I want them to be a little more substantial. I want to waste less of your time. So the more you support, but the more you watch, the more you tune in, that all helps. That encourages me to make videos even more frequently. So yeah, let me know what you would like my schedule to be like. And yeah, hi to YTKR. Do I think annual Mac releases are too much? Well, I hate to do it, but I will bring out the Rene Ritchie quote, right? Which is, I should probably write it down with like his headshot and like, you know, how like these famous people quotes happen. And basically, the idea is, because I don't want to use the exact quote, I want to actually like paraphrase it to make as much sense as possible. But the metaphor is that if you go to the bakery every day, you don't you expect the bread there to be fresh every day. even if you don't go there every day yourself, right? The idea of annual Mac releases is not about you. Like, to me, it doesn't matter if like I have my M1 Max MacBook Pro. Up until like Apple has like a tandem OLED MacBook Pro and Wi-Fi 7, and well, some stuff has of course come to pass, like Thunderbolt 5 and things like that, right? I technically don't care what comes out in the interim, but others people do. One of my best friends just bought an M3 MacBook Air because, as YTKR also alluded to, it was heavily discounted because M4 Max had come out, and Black Friday, of course. This year's Black Friday deals for tech are actually surprisingly good here in Germany, so I understand why some people have really been like attracted to it. I think the fact that 16 gigs of RAM is now the standard really changes like the percentage of like if you can have a $200 discount on a 1700 euro product that brings it down to 1500. That's actually nice. That's an over 10% reduction. While if you had to pay close to 2,000 to get a $200 discount, now that's a little bit less impressive, and the end product is basically still way more expensive, between like 1,500 and something like 1,750. So yeah, if you guys found some deals, got something, let me know. Give me your impressions. I know some of you bought like M4 Mac minis and stuff like that, so I would love to exchange opinions on that. But basically, the thought on annual Mac releases, let's even just ignore like are we talking all MacBooks? Are we talking MacBook Pro, MacBook Air, right? For one, we don't know if it's actually annual. Now, if you actually average it, yes, like between M1 and M4, we are actually on a 4-year schedule in a way, like on a 1 year per chip schedule. But it so happens that we are still at the infancy of Apple Silicon in a way, right? For Macs, we don't know if for Apple, for example, it might be for the very first time in a while more advantageous of upgrading Macs every year regularly, and whenever they don't have big tech like to upgrade it, they will always have a chip upgrade up their sleeve. It doesn't hurt, of course, any of the older products. It doesn't hurt software availability or performance on the older products. Like sometimes when a company, like this is my complaint, for example, with Samsung and creating like 50 different models from like the A series to the S series to all different sizes, sometimes using TSMC build chips, some Samsung build chips, Qualcomm chips, even a few MediaTek chips here and there, right? Of course, the disaster and the decency that was like Exynos with its ups and downs, right? That's hard to optimize for. Apple releasing annually like an M4 to an M5 to an M6, an M4 Pro to an M5 Pro to an M6 Pro is not really holding them back from optimizing software. It's not really hindering like any decent marketing campaigns and stuff like that. And yeah, as you said, it helps bring down prices of older devices. Those who are always likely to frequently upgrade, those are actually becoming like nice whales for us to milk. Yes, I know that metaphor doesn't work. But basically, people who always want something new, doesn't have to be annual, but let's say biannually, or even once every 3 years, which is still faster than the average MacBook replacement, right? Those people can now sell their devices. They become refurbished, or they just sell them on the secondhand store, or they hand them down to family and friends, right? And that just increases. That is also very important. It increases the overall count of Macs in the wild. And while that doesn't matter anymore as much for iPhone, and to a lesser degree even for iPad, because those devices have just sold so phenomenally well, Macs are still partially transitioning from Intel There are still like perceptions of market share and mind share. There's still a lot of like 3D apps, right, that haven't made their way fully to be optimized to Apple Silicon. Most games haven't, right? And we need that mind share. We need that actual market share. We need that large consumer base, both for Apple, for those developers. So, yeah, while I do understand why it can feel like, oh, annual Mac releases, how much did you really have in 12 months? I would argue if one chip upgrade is really small, you can always turn it into a 6 month, like an 18-month upgrade, basically 12 plus 6. And with that, you can maybe build the chip already on a newer node, right? Differentiate the same generation of A series and M series chips. There's a lot that Apple can do, but what I wouldn't want them to do is have like 2 year gaps. I think that would be too big. I think 18 months works well. The problem with 18 months is it means sometimes it launches closer to the holiday season, sometimes it launches closer to the back to school season. And while, yes, Apple can sell Macs at either season, of course, I do believe that they liked this big on swap of like people buying as many devices as possible during the holiday. Then they can gradually bring down prices, then create like Black Friday deals on products that might have lost some of their luster. Not Black Friday, but like back to school season, then some Black Friday deals to sell out of old inventory as a new product comes out. I think that actually works pretty well, in my opinion. YTKR, I think Apple should focus on A series, like increasing the CPU core. No, I disagree. Increasing the CPU cores to 8 has absolutely no impact for us on a system level basis. I actually have that on my Twitter somewhere. Jesus. How do I do this? 8 Elite, 25 watts. There. So first of all, thanks to at Raphael on Twitter for collecting data from a lot of different sources. Shout out to the original source, which I cannot really identify or anything, but this is actually interesting and this is worth covering. Shows that now this is very important because this does connect to my criticism of GeekerVan that I usually provide on this channel, because this data shows that the 8 Elite draws around 25 watts at multi-threaded. That's of course with 8 cores, as you suggested, YTKR. By the way, I agree with your suggestion that we should get either more GPU cores or newer GPU cores. I would also argue we need Apple to be slightly more aggressive in utilizing newer RAM. Like I, for example, love the M4 Pro and M4 Max for finally using 8533 LPDDR memory, but like the fact that the regular M4, the A18 still are like a 7500, like basically like a middle ground. I didn't like that, and next year I would like for at least for 8533 on the A19 series, and I would like for something like the 10700 mega transfers memory that we're starting to see on like 8 Elite and Dimensity 9400 devices. Like I would love to see that on the M5, and yes, if they would need to delay the M5 and the M5 MacBooks by like half a year to make that possible, I would totally agree with that. I would also like to see finally faster storage, especially on the base M series. Give us PCIe 4x4 equivalent speeds, and go crazy on the Pros. Give us PCIe 5x4 speeds. But basically what I'm saying here is these multi-threaded results for the 8 Elite, they do come at a cost. Now, I should note it does not actually sustainably use 25 watts at peak. We are talking about spikes. This is the one thing that I've always criticized with GeekerVan. It's because they don't show me power consumption charts, right? I can never say if their data is very like spiky, very like evenly. Now, I should note these spikes make sense. That's because Geekbench tests a variety of different apps that of different tests which are designed to replicate like real world apps and tasks. Now the peak is actually pretty uniform here, hitting 25 watts for multi-threaded. So in terms of spiky behavior, that's actually very consistent spiky behavior, which for example on my M1 Max, my chip actually in Geekbench only ever spikes out to a little over 30 watts. Now obviously the average power consumption will be higher, but I just found it interesting. My basic response to people saying, oh, we need like a 6-core E-core cluster, with which I don't actually disagree. More threads is more good for DOS. But at that point, I actually don't want Apple to use those E-cores to like heavily boost multi-core performance. And the reason for that is pretty simple. I want efficiency, and I want those E-cores to actually be used for background tasks, so my primary application can get a lot of performance still, like most of the chip's cache is used for it, most of the bandwidth, of course, most of the power draw. That is what I want from potentially more E-cores. I don't want Apple to just put in more E-cores to push well beyond the 10,000 range and become like the first smartphone chip in the 12,000 Geekbench C. That could happen. Apple is still interested in, of course, creating new marketing points for their devices, and I cannot blame them for it. But previously, Apple has never really been done benchmark chasing. In fact, with the 8 Elite devices, we kind of see that Geekbench 6, 3D Mark, those are all like whitelisted special applications for the system, where the system basically, it's not an artificial mode like in the past where high performance mode was entirely only dedicated to like benchmark spoofing basically. But it so happens that, yeah, most games, even most productivity apps are not whitelisted. So this 8,800, 9,000, even 10,000 plus score, that is not actually indicative of real system performance. You will not get the same multi-core clocks at everything. Sometimes you won't even get the full single-core clocks at like 4.3 gigahertz, because you see those spike up pretty high to like 10, 11 watts or something like that. That is still hard to sustain, even with a vapor chamber cooler inside the smartphone, even with a degree of active cooling, unless you go really bulky. So I'm just trying to say, I'm not trying to downplay your excitement for more chip. I definitely want, for example, the A series chips to be like around 120, maybe 125 square millimeters, rather than somewhere between 100 and 110. I would like for them to have 8 GPU cores. Like there's plenty that we agree on, but just pointing out that it's not as easy as it sounds, because at any 25 watt peak, you know that the iPhone cannot sustain that. Like 18 watts with the iPhone's meager cooling, and meager, I mean really like versus the high-end Android competition. That is pretty much the max, even for those short little spikes. 2 E-cores would give a good boost, won't hurt efficiency. Yes, it would. The problem is not just efficiency, though. I don't want to down talk. Yeah, efficiency would be better if you divide the task between all those cores. But the fact is that on mobile operating systems, most tasks have not really been designed to handle that many cores. And a lot of what we do still likes one core. This is, or two, right? This is, for example, why I actually appreciate that the 8 Elite has 2 performance cores, while a chip like the Dimensity 9400, while it technically has 1 X925 and I believe 3 X4 cores, right? Why would I want anything to be done by the older gen, less efficient X4 if I could, if I could trade like 3 X4 cores for 1 X925 core and overall have like a reduction in cores and stuff like that? I would, just saying. Even the base M chip had become a 10 core. Well, the M chips consume literally twice as much wattage. But it's an iPad Pro. The 2 extra E-cores will help a lot in multi-thread and efficiency. And this is why I'm asking, what would you do with that multi-thread on iPhone? Because don't forget, A series is only iPhone. M series is shared between iPhone and iPad. Apple has already proven that they are willing to do some very creative binning, from disabling one P core on iPad to disabling two E cores on the iMac, the M4 iMac, right? So I don't deny that, of course, there's more E cores, there's more multi-thread to gain, but at what point is any extra multi-thread meaningless? And all die size is expensive. If Apple is going to increase die size, I would love that to go to GPU cores. I would love that to go to, at some point, Apple will need to have new media encoders built in, like H.266 standard and AV1, finally going from just decoding to also encoding, right? There's a lot that Apple will need die size for, and I don't think that two extra E-cores to do some benchmark chasing will be the best solution for that. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, please comment. I love interacting with your comments. I love getting your opinions. You see, I love debating you a tiny little bit. Yeah, just let me know. AV Mail asking, when will we get to the point where A and M converge, with M becoming cooler and A becoming more powerful? We never will. The point is that what we do have, and this is the original topic of the day, is we do have node shrinks, we do have new architectures, we do even have specific choices for architectures, like for example how Apple reduced the cache amount drastically from the A19 Pro to the regular A19, right? To make it slightly smaller, to make it more price efficient. In a way, it could actually make it also more energy efficient, at least for lower clock tasks, but usually more cache is actually pretty good. So that was definitely more of a price consideration. But no, M series will never go way below its like 20 watt target or something like that, and its peak of like 30 watts if you combine CPU and GPU. That's just not what it's built for. Even the passively cooled MacBook Air has like a nice large aluminum unibody to dissipate that heat. And if a new node gives you more performance at the same wattage, and those advantages are getting smaller and smaller, 2 nanometer schedule TSMC, there should be a roadmap here. That is the news here. There. YTKR, believe it or not, a lot of people are interested in Geekbench, not the real-world test. Yes, that is actually a really good point, though. And I don't want Apple to ever become a company that chases benchmarks over actual people's experiences. I do believe, while it might be hard to get people, where's the roadmap? I shouldn't have said schedule. I should have just said roadmap, right? Well, I know it might be hard to convince YouTubers to not mention stuff like Geekbench results. I would argue Apple has lagged behind certain results behind Qualcomm in the past. It has never hurt their chances of selling. Then they went far ahead. And while it helped, it didn't change the game for them. It's the overall iOS user experience. Most people switching from Android to iPhone, as far as I understand, don't even buy the highest end iPhone, right? They're happy with getting A19 versus A19 Pro. They're happy even back in the past getting like an A15 versus an A16 chip. They were happy of getting an A15 chip with one fewer GPU cores and less memory. The difference is in my opinion, should be the end user experience. And by the way, if you have these gains, AV Mail, right? If N2 is better than N3E, which is what we have before right now, that isn't even considering like N3P, which we're getting in the interim. Unfortunately, that is part of today's rumor. But N2 versus N3E is a 25 to 30% efficiency improvement, 25 to 30% power consumption reduction, or a 10 to 15% improvement in power. Now, if you look at N3 versus N5, those are actually the exact same gaps, but N2 is being compared here to N3E. not to N3P, which will come out in between. And if you obviously calculate that, that reduces that 30% gap to more like a 22% gap. This becomes more like a 10% improvement rather than a peak of 15%. And then when you look, for example, at A16 versus N2P, which will likely have N2P to A16, though there is a chance that, of course, A16 and N2P will actually hit production at the same time. And then it will basically just become a choice of cost of what do you want to go with N2P as a company, maybe use a node that is familiar to N2, which is like the first GAFET node, or would you actually pay extra to get A16, which is the first node with like backside power delivery from TSMC. It's a little bit more complicated, might be subject to like lower yields at first, right? But then you look at it, and A16 versus N2P at that point will be a smaller gap than the others, right? So I'm just trying to tell you there's a good reason here that Apple is not going to reduce power on M series chips, and they certainly won't boost power draw on A series chips to the point where they might be comparable and Apple might just unify those. There is potential that if Apple goes like really creative, they could like cut down an M series chip down to an A series chip. But that's honestly would be pretty creative cutting, because unless your chip is giant, you usually like a lot of your chip is actually like memory controllers and stuff like that to a surprising amount. Usually only if you go giant, you can really like do a lot creative stuff with binning. But yeah, that's just like, I hope that answers your question, AV Mail. Now, speaking of TSMC 2 nanometer, which of course, according to this roadmap, was scheduled for a second half of 2025 production. Now, it seems, now again, this is only one factory. This is the 2 nanometer fab by TSMC in Kaohsiung, I believe it's pronounced. Don't hate me. I unfortunately don't have very, very little interaction with Taiwanese or Chinese languages. But it is 6 months ahead of schedule. So that's significant, because technically, if that means second half of 2025 production turns into first half of 2025 production, couldn't that allow Apple to build some of their 2025 chips, which let's exclude the A19 actually, unfortunately, because the A19 is launching in September. I don't think that even 6 months ahead of schedule would be enough to create enough A19. Let's even just say just A19 Pro chips to supply all iPhones coming out in September of 2025. Now, if Apple was willing to delay the iPhone Pro, 17 Pro into like November, I could see that happen, but that's a pretty big delay. And if Apple then still has like production issues somewhere around the holiday season, that's not really good. Apple did that in the past for something like the iPhone 12, where a notable part of the generation came out like way later than September. But I don't know if that was such a positive experience for Apple. Plus, the iPhone 12 was a major redesign. It came out with 5G. It had a lot of help and push from like carriers, right? The iPhone 17 series will not likely see that kind of like enthusiastic backing with like very lucrative deals, basically free advertisement for Apple. And Rosa joining the chat. Hi, thank you guys for tuning in today. I know this isn't the biggest leak ever, but I just like the context of it all, because we do have people here who are similar to me, very nerdy about this stuff, very interested in like the results of how good will the final performance be, how good will like the efficiency be. And of course, any big news from TSMC is like, oh my God, could Apple actually utilize it? Well, it seems like TSMC expects a strong demand for 2 nanometer. 2 nanometer, of course, being their first gate all around transistor technology. Seems like while Intel might be ahead of of TSMC when it comes to bringing out actual GAAFET to the market, and that will be their A18 node, that will likely come out probably very late 2025 to early 2026. And it might actually be more competitive with N3P in terms of efficiency rather than 2 nanometer. Now, it might be more dense than N3P, but it will also, of course, be in far lower production numbers. Intel just doesn't have the customers. They don't really have to plan on making their node like actually realistic for the real world. They just have to make enough of it for their own chips and hope, desperately hope, that through the backing of the US government, investing like a couple of $1 billion into them, through the Chips and Science Act, that through the fact that maybe some people are more skeptical towards China, and do they plan on invading Taiwan at some point? Well, of course, they did invade Tibet in the past, and they've promised to take back Taiwan. And of course, people are worried. And TSMC, in fact, has started producing factories outside of Taiwan, which a lot of the world was really happy about. But at the same time, Taiwan is also really, really protective of their latest technologies. They're basically saying that you cannot build whatever is their latest node outside of Taiwan, right? So while Arizona is getting new factories, like they just put online a very good 4 nanometer factory. That one is building A16 chips for some reason. I still don't know where Apple is really putting them. And they will be getting a 3 nanometer chip by the time 2 nanometer starts hitting like production in Taiwan, and 2 nanometer chips might start coming out starting in 2028 from the Arizona chip plants. So, and what of course would that coincide with? Well, that would coincide with basically guaranteed production of A16 at that point, A16P, very like the latest might be even like A12 or something like that by 2028 production. Might not actually be mass produced yet, but definitely like a trial run, a substantial trial run. A company like Apple would likely be like on the successor of A16, while a lot of other companies are like sharing A16, maybe to a lesser degree still N2P supply, right? All makes sense. We have seen that for the fact that, for example, even in the year of 2024, TSMC's N4 node is still alive, right? Just this year, AMD launched their latest Zen 5 chips on TSMC's 4 nanometer node. They have like a 3 nanometer variant for servers, so you basically know where the real money is in the industry. This is why Nvidia is like a $3.4 trillion company. This is also why Nvidia, even in 2025, will be launching a 4 nanometer chip, and that is because they would rather that chip use a lot more power than actually deal with the much higher cost of N3, or God forbid like N3P or something like that. And while they will make a server architecture that is on N3 and come out sometime like late next year, you basically get another confirmation of where the real money in the industry is. So while I do encourage people to get really excited, I understand that sometimes excitement is like, it depends on like your own life and stuff like that. And obviously I understand gains these days are not as high as they used to be. I still usually encourage people to get excited. For now, I really cannot tell you to get too excited about getting actual like 2 nanometer chips from Apple, just because this factory is going online 6 months earlier. And that is coming also just today from DLEC, which isn't perfect, but it's okay. because apparently Apple has ordered 5 nanometer chips from TSMC as the company begins production development of its next gen processor for future devices. This is a Korean language news outlet, so again, maybe they do have some good ties to TSMC, maybe they don't. A lot of this stuff can be usually speculation. Analysts, for example, don't always really have sources. They often regurgitate what people with sources will say. But we have heard a lot of rumors that A19, A15 are going to be N3P. Of course, if we look at the schedule, N3P versus N3E, which is currently powering the A18 and M4 generation of processors, we get between 5 and 10% reduction in power or a 5% improvement in performance. I always want to tell you, guys, please know to learn these charts. These charts are not saying you get 10% more performance, you get a 5% more performance at 10% lower power. It's either or. You don't get to like get both unless your architecture is also way new, but then that's not a benefit from the node, is it? The density improvement, there is some of N3P versus N3E. Of course, N3E was notorious, or at least like kind of infamous, for not actually improving like density over N3B, which was what powered Apple's M3 and A17 chips. And N2 here is the actual like real improvement in density. TSMC is actually also arguing that it's not just their logic that increases in density, but for the first time in a while, they're able to deliver a decent improvement in cache density. So yeah, while I understand the excitement for N2, and I also understand, yeah, Master, I feel your pain. Like reading like an Antac, it's so bad. Knowing like, look how organized this is. Look how not like, just like from a website perspective. Like I know it's not like the prettiest or anything, but like you have like your story. You can focus on it, right? You have a very nice chart, which they usually actually like write out from like data that TSMC provides. They don't just like post a photo that TSMC has posted. They actually write it down so it's easy to copy and stuff like that. Like text nicely presented. The article is not too long, and then you get to the comment section right below. This reminds me of like an like 2010 12ish website, right? Which of course that's what it is in a way, but that's because it works. And then you have all the references, right? Like the company, the nodes and stuff like that, where the data was coming from, right? It's just such a nicely presented website. If you compare it to the mess that is like The Verge, right? What do they have that is even remotely interesting, by the way? Like you see like how difficult it even is. Like, oh yeah, Samsung's One UI 7 looks rather iOS-y. Like you click on it, and is this a real article? What is this? Like, I understand they don't actually have too much to talk about, but like comments, okay, at least that works. But that's also because The Verge isn't like, they had the redesign, but thankfully they kept like the comment section here nicely. But like, what is this kind of article? Was it like, why does it have like this border? What makes it so special? Is it because it's a post, right? Like you realize you're still a website, you need to look like that, but that's a rant for an entirely different discussion, unfortunately. Yeah, so M5 3 nanometer technology. There is an interesting tidbit here. This is why I'm covering this, and they're saying Apple's decision to forgo TSMC more advanced 2 nanometer process for the M5 chip is believed to be primarily due to cost considerations. Despite this, the M5 will feature significant advancements over the M4, notably through the adoption of TSMC's system on integrated chip technology. This 3D chip stacking approach enhances thermal management and reduces electrical leakage compared to traditional 2D designs. Apple is said to have expanded its cooperation with TSMC on the next generation hybrid SoIC package. By the way, like a lot of people are saying this is due to cost. it could also be that when it comes to 2 nanometer availability, combining it with like newer tech could be very complicated early on, right? Plus, if there are any yield issues, depending on when Apple wants to actually launch the M5, there are problems in combining like two brand new technologies. Let's actually read a little bit into SOIC because I don't know too much about it. Logic, memory. Okay. TSMC SOIC services include the custom manufacturing of semiconductors. So they do have a difference of chip on wafer and wafer on wafer. I believe it makes the most sense for Apple to use. Yeah. Wafer on wafer creates heterogeneous 3D silicon through a wafer staking process. Okay, this is basically a production improvement. This basic, like the final improvement for us. I actually wouldn't know. Like, I assume this could improve yield or something like that. The tight bonding pitch and thin through silicon vias enable minimum parasitics for better performance, lower power, less latency, and a smaller form factor. SOICX wafer and wafer is suitable for high yielding nodes and the same die size applications or design. Okay, so I mean, it reads almost like tandem OLED. Like, this is the kind of stuff, by the way, guys, I'll never lie to you. I'm not an expert of like any kind of like chip stacking technology in this way. So this is just very interesting to me. Let me know if you have like a very like concise definition of this that could help me out. But yeah, I believe I read about this in the past, but this has just like escaped my mind, I guess. So TSMC SOIC is a key technology pillar that advances heterogeneous chiplet integration. Such integration reduces size and increases performance. TSMC SOIC features ultra high density vertical stacking. So I guess this is like logic memory stacked on top logic here showing. So high performance, low power, minimum resistance, inducance, capacitance. My God. Heterogeneous integration of known good dies with different chip sizes, functionalities, and wafer node technologies. Well, that's multi-chiplet design basically, right? At that point. Yeah, system on a chip before chip partition, BCD, variant TSMC partition chiplets, and reintegration schemes. My God, I should probably read upon that to not like on my own time, so as not to bore you to death. With an innovative bonding scheme, TSMC SOIC technology enables the strong bonding pitch scalability for chip input and output to realize high-density die-to-die interconnections. But this is my question: what are they doing? Like, this is why I'm saying, like, this makes more sense because this creates like a better final result that is still like a single die solution. This is about primarily about multi-die solutions, is it not? Interesting. A short die-to-die connection creates a smaller form factor, higher bandwidth, better power integrity, signal integrity, and lower power consumption compared to current state-of-the-art packaging solutions. Holistic 3D system integration into both homogeneous and heterogeneous chiplets into a single SoC-like chiplets with a smaller footprint and thinner profile that can be holistically integrated into advanced wafer-level system integration, aka chip-on-wafer substrate. Okay, CoWoS, which Apple does utilize, or Info, which is Apple is rumored to utilize, I believe, for like the next Ultra chips. From the outside, the integrated chips looks like an ordinary SiC, but on the inside is embedded with heterogeneously integrated functionality. I assume that this stuff is also going to power like a lot of like NVIDIA Blackwell and stuff like that. Um, so I know it would work definitely best with like homogeneous like chiplets. So and Blackwell is basically rumored on the high end to have well, not even just rumored, to have like two dies that are basically interconnected. Whether the communication happens through something like CoWoS or Info, I actually don't know. But yeah, that would be very interesting to know. if they integrate something like that. Do they have a reference here? Because they do not say which SOIC is. Um, it combines thermoplastic carbon fiber composite molding technology. The package reportedly entered a small trial production phase in July. Apple's forthcoming M5 chip is anticipated to bring significant. I would argue this is weird. What do you mean it's anticipated? Guys, did you look at the roadmap? Like N2P versus N3P versus N2E. What are you talking about? Like that, those are not significant changes, even by today's standards. Production could begin as early as the second half of 2025, with the first M5 equipped devices potentially launching by the end of next year or early 2026, assuming. By the way, when we're talking early 2026. If M5 is not expected to come out in any way, shape, or form in 2025, I can only tell Apple, please, please bring it out 2026 and make it actually 2 nanometer. That way, your N3P production is entirely focused on A19, A19 Pro, which is very unlikely to get 2 nanometer anyway. But at least for 2026, you could start the year with a BAM, even if starting the year is like May or June, similar to how we saw with the M4 iPad Pro, introducing a new Note technology for the first time and actually a new architecture. So, yeah, if Apple could do that, but it seems like they aren't. And of course, we are rumored to be getting quite a lot of products on M5. iPad Pro, now I have not heard too many rumors about it, but I guess it makes sense. I mean, if Apple really wants to make the iPads as expensive as they are, especially the Pro models, they kind of do have to keep giving them like really good chips, or otherwise people will just buy them a lot when they come out, and then a lot of that excitement that is coming from like pros and enthusiasts, early adopters, will start to wane, and people will just wait for the next chip refresh to either buy the old gen at a discount, or the enthusiasts and the pros and stuff like that just buy the newest thing. The MacBook Pro, of course, if we are still getting like annual releases, then we would go from a late 2023 to a late 2024 to now a late 2025 release. That makes perfect sense. MacBook Air and M5 variants will likely arrive in early 2026. That makes sense if the M4 launches in early 2025. And yes, Apple Vision Pro is rumored to get a substantial performance increase, going from the M2 chip to all the way to the M5 chip, and that one is coming somewhere between late 2025 and early 2026. And thanks to its dual-use SoIC design, Apple also plans to deploy the M5 chip within its AI server infrastructure. That is the thing I am honestly most curious about. If that SoIC integration is basically about afterwards, maybe even combining like M5 chips together. I'm not honestly too sure. Desert67, I'm not chasing the technology. Happy with my M4 Pro Mini. Well, you just got the latest and greatest, but I understand what you mean. And besides, I lived with a 24 iMax i5 for 10 years. Well, I lived with late 2012 iMac. Tech specs. That's the thing I lived with for almost a decade. So that's, of course, Apple's first like laminated glass iMac. Those super thin, like what was it, 5mm thick border, not borders, like a thickness. 1440p with actually pretty good screen for it back in the day. I had the 3.4 quad-core Intel Core i7 inside. I believe I got it with 8 gigs of RAM, and then I upgraded later to 16 gigabytes by having like 4 gigabyte slots in there. 1600 megahertz DDR3, actually for back in the day, not too shabby. I got it with a 3 terabyte Fusion drive, which actually effed me over a little bit. Because the 3 terabyte Fusion drive Where is it? Boot camp late 2012 iMac. Please give me English. If you have it exactly like this one model, this super specific model with the 3 terabyte fusion drive, right? Uh, this alert may appear when installing macOS, Mojave, or later on certain iMac models that have a 3 terabyte hard drive. Learn what you can do. Basically, the idea is you had to choose between like the latest install of macOS or like boot camp with Windows. So that was quite funny. I know there were like some workarounds. I'm not quite sure, but like yeah, you see like there were even like Apple solutions for like late 2013 and 2014 iMac and late 2012 iMac. If you have this model configured with a 3 terabyte hard drive, you must remove the boot camp partition before you can upgrade to macOS, Mojave, or later. This was very funny. I have no idea what exactly happened there, but I remember just being mind effed that like my specific model is almost being called out. And yeah, I had that model with with a 680MX, so I really went all out, and I used it up until I got the late 2021 M1 Max MacBook Pro, which is what I'm using right now. By the way, speaking of personal purchases, just wanted to give a shout out to my. I gifted myself the Grid iPhone 3GS. Like you can see behind me, like I have the iPhone 4S. Which I didn't get it white, unfortunately, because my iPhone 4S that I had was in white. But for the 3GS, I actually got it in the color that I had it, which was white. So over time, I will hopefully collect like every iPhone that I actually have owned myself in a nice way and present it. I'll probably have to move my streaming space a little bit around to accommodate for that, but I think two will fit rather nicely for now. Yeah, so, but yeah, Desert 67, I actually fully understand not chasing the technology. I'm actually not covering this to say, like, you know how Vadim from MaxTag, those guys, they will say, like, oh my God, M2 was a stopgap to M3, but then actually both M2 and M3 were stopgaps to M4, and I'm pretty sure that if M5 launches on N3P, doesn't have like a dramatically new architecture, they will be like saying, oh, M5 is a stopgap to M6 or something like that. But this is why I also answered YTKR's questions earlier in the chat, where I said like a lot of it has still to do, in my opinion, with just the fact that people want the latest and greatest, even if it's not that much greater, right? It's just easier to get somebody to buy a 1 month old product, at least an enthusiast, than like a year old product at that point. Like it works for products like consoles, it works for products where you can aggressively price them down. But since Apple is not the company to do that, because partially you see if even Apple is now considering like, oh my God, 2 nanometer, what is even the availability, what is the cost potentially, can we like look in the future of like producing it in the US or something like that. If we build it on 2 nanometer, can we use it for our like private cloud compute servers for Apple Intelligence and stuff like that? Can we use those in general to become more server independent, right? And especially like if they plan to use them for servers, they very likely need very, very large orders. So even if they launch like late 2025 for like the MacBook Pro or the iPad Pro, like they will need a lot more supply than just for those Macs and iPads if they really plan on like making Apple private cloud compute as ambitious as I think they will want it to be one day. Like a lot of Apple engineers, a lot of Apple's executives have spoken very enthusiastically about AI. While you can argue with them if whether or not that's a fad or whether like the enthusiasm behind it by investors is overstated, I still think that Apple will have a good opportunity to like sell investors on like, you know how like Google, how Microsoft Microsoft, they're all buying like the like 80-90% profit margin server hardware by Nvidia. Well, we can make our own. We can bring like build costs down by like 2x, and we can build down like power consumption costs by 3x with our tech, right? So there's a lot that Apple can do. There are a lot of reasons why they might make like pragmatic choices that might not excite us like 2 nanometer would, but just like the combination of like integrating SOIC, using stuff potentially for server down the road, having a lot more products to simultaneously launch. By the way, in the last couple of years, Apple did not just launch M4 or M3 at the end of the year. They launched it alongside M5, M4 Pro, M3 Pro, M4 Max, M3 Max, right? So that, of course, further increases the amount of products that Apple would have to have logistics prepared for very early on. Desert 67, many chase it. In the long run, they never look back to notice what they actually spend. Well, we will actually talk a little bit about spending today, believe it or not. I do like spending money on tech. Tech makes me happy. Some people like clothes, some people like jewelry, some people like changing their house furniture way too regularly, in my opinion. Some people buy every game that comes out at full price or something like that. Some people collect fucking Beanie Babies or shit like that. So yeah, while I'm not saying that I'm a hoarder of tech and buying it left and right, like my MacBook is 3 years old, I did not upgrade my iPhone 15 Pro to the 16 Pro. My iPad is actually a little over 3 years old now. I have the M1 iPad Pro. I upgraded my PlayStation 5 to a PlayStation 5 Pro, but my old PlayStation 5 immediately went to like my niece's home and stuff like that. So my Apple Watch Ultra is the Apple Watch Ultra 1. It's the Apple Watch Ultra 2. I apologize. I did not immediately upgrade my Apple Watch Series 4, not to Series 5, not to Series 6, not to Series 7, not to Series 8, but I waited all the way until Ultra 2. So, yeah, I definitely understand that spending is a big consideration to have. And it's this consideration for Apple too, of course. If they build like their devices way too expensively and to reduce their profit margins, that's not too great, is it, for them? Going a little bit outside of Apple rumors, there isn't actually that much to talk about. The Galaxy S25 Ultra seems to have leaked, and I apologize for blinding you, as I tend to do here. You can see it's very squared off, basically matching the design of like the regular Galaxy S24 and 24 Plus. And of course the iPhones. And unfortunately, you see it has those ugly camera rings from the Galaxy Fold and stuff like that, and the Galaxy Flip. So that was a design trend very recently introduced. A lot of people hoped that they would have the much cleaner ring design, camera ring design that like has been on Galaxy S devices for years. But alas, that is not to change. There is no like big changes in optics. This is why the cameras are very similar. Like the ultra wide is going like from 12 megapixels to like 50 megapixels with a slightly larger sensor. The main sensor is staying the same size, and the telephoto is I believe it's not changing at all or something like that, or very little. And then the 3x is just staying the same. So this is why the cameras can also look pretty much identical. Even though, like, yeah, there will be some improvements, and of course the image signal processor of the Snapdragon 8 Elite will help. But yeah, it's not the biggest and most exciting change. I personally don't like this design too much, but that's of course for you to decide if you care or not. Desert 67, Touch ID on the Max, but why they don't incorporate Bio or Touch on the iPhone bewilders me. What's their obsession with Face ID? Well, Face ID is very passive. You swipe up from the bottom because obviously you want to have like still some control on whether your device unlocks or not. You don't cover up the screen like the second you open it up. Apple's lock screen shows you your notifications, it shows you your widgets. While yes, only a small part would be covered if you put on a Touch ID, that's okay. Or you put Touch ID in the button, which becomes a whole different issue of like where's the button placed and stuff like that. People already didn't like that camera control placement. Face ID is also multifunctional. Face ID gives you 3D scanning of your of your face if you want to. Stuff like an emoji works through face. It technically wouldn't need Face ID with very advanced like scanning, but still, it helps with focusing for the front-facing camera. And of course, the notch design is very iconic. Some people like I struggle to really use fingerprint sensors. Like it works for me on my Mac. It's a dedicated button and stuff like that, but I still usually have to wipe my finger clean before I do that. I have never had issues with Face ID. So yeah, I don't think it's an obsession. I think it's a differentiator. I think honestly, a lot of us just internalize the market as a whole, and we think like, oh, everybody uses fingerprint sensors. Why doesn't Apple use fingerprint sensors? But when you fundamentally think about it, why would they need to, right? Face ID is working fine for people. Face ID has made improvements over the years. It works faster than it used to. It works from landscape and portrait mode orientations. Yeah, and just in general, working on Face ID technology is also similar to the LiDAR technology on the back that also helps with focus and stuff like that. So you might as well just keep doing both. And yeah, it's just something different. I feel like that's all a valid statement. And I wish, by the way, and I'm not saying like I'm not just kissing Apple's ass of like, oh my God, Face ID is so multifunctional. I would actually criticize Apple for not utilizing it enough. Like I think that, for example, like Memoji and Emoji. I'm sorry, there's just so much at this point. Like where your face moves and stuff like that. I wish it was way more Face ID based, right? Because when you do it right now, if you actually like dim the light too low, it cannot keep working, even though, well, technically it still sees your face. Face ID does, just not the regular camera. And I just wish that Apple was more aggressive in utilizing it. But they do have other stuff, of course, like for example, oh my God, what is it called? That Apple audio ear scan AirPods. Jesus, please do English. So personal spatial audio, Apple Watch setup, turn off security. To capture a view of your right ear, hold your iPhone with your right hand. Move your right arm 45 degrees to your right, then turn your head slowly to the left. To capture a view of your left ear, switch your iPhone to your left hand. Move your left arm 45 degrees to your left, then turn your head slowly to the right. Audio and visual cues will help you finish the setup. Is it because wait, no, the iPhone SE supports iOS 16 or later. Wait, how do you set it up? I thought you needed a Face ID capable iPhone for that. Did I got that wrong to capture the front view? Is there like, or was that for some other feature that you could use, like basically like an ear scan? I set it up myself. It's weird that I seem to have forgotten it. I just don't want to start video in the browser. It's always like a mess because it always locks me out of my Google account. AirPods. Do I need a Face ID iPhone? Did I miss it? Miss that? Okay, so seemingly that was something that wait. You need an iPhone or newer with the true depth camera. Wait, is true depth for the back or the front? True depth camera. Apple. Is that referring to the front or the back? Yeah, it's the front. So it is true. Wait, why did I skip that on the website? Mac computer with Apple Silicon setup, spatial audio enabled device. Control spatial audio. Wait, but that's not just spatial personalized spatial audio. Yeah. Wait, why did it says that for the German website? Guys, can you help me out? Do you know that like correctly? I remember it being like bound to a Face ID phone. Did they change that? It's September 2024. Well, they probably just added new AirPods models, right, on the website. AirPods 3 or later. Well, they didn't add a AirPods 4 to the description for some reason. Sound with personalized 3D audio. You need an iPhone with iOS 16 or newer. Now, this is in German. And the true depth camera. Did that change? It's updated at the same time, 30th of September 2024. That's like Mac rumors set up personalized spatial audio. Yeah, you will need an iPhone with Face ID. I don't know why this was so confusing. Maybe my brain just briefly malfunctioned. Thank you for sticking with me, guys. Yeah, this is by the way one extra functionality of Face ID. Hope that helps Desert 67. Sorry for the weird tangent here. Guys, we've been streaming for about an hour. If you haven't yet done so, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out with anybody who think might enjoy it, and comment. You see, I love interacting with the comments. If you want to support this channel directly, you can do so via small donations through a super chat or a super sticker. You can become a channel member right here on YouTube. Shout out to our Mark Tech Pro Max supporters, Angelica, Max, Maximus, and Steve right here on YouTube. And of course, you can also support us over on Patreon. And just a small recommendation, follow me over on Blue Sky. Trying to really limit my Twitter exposure. It's really getting like trashier and trashier by the day. Really completely unacceptable. Like, if you want to, you can do threads or whatever. I'll try to see where most people come in. So yeah, however you want to engage with me, it's all fine with me. I just really like growing our community. I love knowing your guys' opinions. So however you want to support me, it's all good. Yeah, but that's basically it for the bigger news of today's. I've talked everything from my own experiences and my own devices to, of course, substantial rumors that will impact us, like will we be getting N3P chips the next year or 2 nanometer? Of course, even broader speaking, like the future of TSMC production. We'll of course see once Intel becomes a little bit more brave and gives us more insights into the state of A18 and stuff like that. We'll see if TSMC remains like undoubtedly the best chip maker in the world, or if they are just undoubtedly the best mass producer. And there is one that is tiny bit better, but for much tinier markets. And we've heard that Apple might utilize their chips for everything from a wide array of course, their own products to their own servers. Which of course would mean that they would need bigger supply, and they would probably want to keep cost a little bit down, which would explain why M5 could be an N3P chip. And then, of course, I would expect following that, the A20 is definitely going to be on 2 nanometer. Maybe, like, who knows if they're really like shooting for the sky with with N2P or whatever. Maybe they push one node forward. I don't know at this point, though. It's a shame, though, that something can be like 6 months ahead of schedule, but that's still not enough to make it for M5. Or maybe Apple could actually change their mind. Maybe TSMC approaches them and says, like, look, we have our 2 nanometer first fab ready. We know you only have, like, for that schedule, like the M5. How about you just invest some money now, put it on the latest node. We'll give you like a 5% mass discount or something like that, in addition to all the other mass discounts you, of course, already have with us. But we need like something to build in that factory. We need to show, and by the way, it's very advantageous for Apple to leverage the latest nodes, not just for technology, but because, of course, the earlier 2 nanometer hits production in Taiwan, the earlier they can start making it eventually in the US or Europe to a degree, even because the faster 2 nanometer comes out, the faster A16 and its successor comes out, and the earlier the Taiwanese government will give them the basically the go ahead to build 2 nanometer outside of Taiwan to still protect its national interests. Now, this is what I have today for you in terms of news, but I did actually want to make a small reaction today, which I know we usually react to like more review stuff and things like that, but I actually wanted to react to I guess a headpiece, a thought piece by Drew from Telosive Tech. And he asked the question, have I changed or has Apple? And it's basically a discussion, why doesn't he review quite as many products as he used to? Why does he show sometimes less enthusiasts for those products? And I thought it was a pretty well-made video. I think it brought up some pretty good points. I think I still disagreed with a lot of it. But yeah, I know usually, like, let me just Geekaran. I thought Geekaran pushed out something new. Yeah, they basically had an almost like post-mortem for the Snapdragon X Elite. I think depending on what information we get on Sunday by like Mark Gurman and stuff like that, I would like to react to that on Sunday. I've heard from some people on Twitter and stuff like that. That's actually pretty interesting, and it's a very, very like destructive video where they have basically nothing good to say. But yeah, basically the idea is that first gen Ryan cores combined with N4P, it really sucks in comparison to N3E second generation Orion on the Snapdragon 8 Elite. Also, the lack of all E-cores sucks. The fact that it has very little GPU performance relative to like its CPU performance sucks. And then, of course, compatibility on Windows also then causes further reduction in performance, which of course this chip cannot really afford. And yeah, I believe they are also like I'm not even sure if they're covering like that like developer thing that they tried to build, but then they couldn't really cool it and stuff like that. So it's a whole interesting discussion to be had. But I haven't yet had the chance to know what are the most important infos in there. So I'll not pre-watch, but I'll get like the basics before Sunday, and depending what else we have on Sunday to talk about, I would like to react to that. That's about it. Let's actually go with Drew, with Telosive Tech, an absolute OG on YouTube for 10 years. I believe it's like, is it the 10-year anniversary? So sound should be coming through the earpods, and as always, let me know if the audio mix between me and the YouTube video works all right. Sometimes it's hard to get that correct. If some of my face covers up part of the video, I don't think that's a big loss. This is a talking head video, so you'll have two talking heads almost side by side. I don't think that's too bad. Yeah, of course, let's get started.
community question today, because believe it or not, I do read a lot of your guys' comments, and I often will make a video specifically upon request. You know, it's very easy for people to say, I'm not interested in this topic, talk about something else. Like, that's most of YouTube. Like, the vast majority of videos online you don't want to watch. So don't act like you're some kind of wise man or philosopher for being able to come to the conclusion that you have found one of the rare videos that you don't want to watch and want to let the creator know. I get it, it's hard. Sometimes there's dry seasons during tech. In fact, most of the time it gets kind of boring, it gets kind of stale. So by simply not clicking on the video, you're telling me that. You don't have to go into the comments and say, don't talk about this, I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, bad comments are still decently good for the algorithm, but I guess if you really like need that for your mental health or something like that, and not saying that he's like fragile or anything like that, but I mean, like, yeah, I understand that you would get annoyed if like people for no reason come in and say like, oh, I don't want to see you doing that. The issue is, I would argue that Drew doesn't really produce enough content to actually like get rid of that kind of commentary, because if you produce a lot of content, right, it's easy for like viewers to say, you know what, I don't care about this particular video, but you produce great content regularly that I like. But with Drew, a lot of the content that I liked him to do in the past, unfortunately, has died down. So I think that's where some of those comments are coming from.
About that. But what I really appreciate out there are the fans that are willing to suggest things and say things like, I'd
True.
really like you to talk more about
Same.
this.
I
That's
appreciate
far
you
more
guys
helpful
telling me
for
what
me
you would
as a
like to see me
creator. So
cover
I wanted to
next.
reward Alex today, who asked me over on Twitter to do an introspective video on Apple and my overall opinions on tech and how they've changed over time. And there's intentionally no skit in this video because I do genuinely intend it to be somewhat of a serious topic, because I've seen many comments like this in the past, like, Drew, you've changed. And some people would argue, including myself, that Apple has changed in many ways, and the tech community as a whole is not the same as it used to be. And is my behavior just a reflection on the tech culture changing, or have I just genuinely grown or changed in some regard? And maybe if younger Drew was reviewing tech today, it wouldn't feel like I had changed. But I actually think both have changed. I think I have changed as a person, and Apple has changed, and we're all
Yes, but I do argue that both things can be simultaneously true, while the degree of a statement might be much more significant for one over the other. So, while of course Apple has changed in the last decade, that's natural. I mean, beyond Steve Jobs' death, of course, in 2011, which puts us actually now beyond a decade, as time flies, as it turns out. But there is also the unfortunate truth that things change in general. Of course, Johnny Ive left Apple. Scott Forstall left Apple. Phil Schiller at this point has left Apple, even though he continues to be a very engaged Apple fellow. Like a lot of engineers that were there during the Steve Jobs era, well, I would argue most of them were probably young enough to stay around. You could argue that many of them could have found some other jobs. Basically, turnover is quite natural for all companies. But when we are talking about change, fundamentally, people changing is company changing too. Now, Tim Cook is very much the constant here over the last decade, basically being a CFO before that, and before Steve Jobs passed away, and even taking over as CEO a little bit before that. So, but Tim Cook will leave, not because Apple is a failure, not because his tenure will like be remembered badly, but simply because times change. People get older, people seek to spend more time with family, or just finally build themselves a private life. I haven't heard too much about Tim's private life being very successful or not. All I hear is that he basically works all day. um, and once you have accumulated a nice amount of money, you're probably looking to spend it in like the last days of your life, even if the last days are still like 20 or 25 years even. But still, you want to spend those days like relatively calm and quiet. So Apple has changed, I would argue, less than some people say. I think the core spirit is still there. I think some of the old obsessions are clearly still there. Even some of the old Johnny Ive obsessions of making everything just impossibly thin and light whenever possible, or sometimes whenever even not quite so possible with current technology. Drew, I would argue, has changed more, not because he appreciates tech dramatically less, but of course, he's not a teen anymore. He's a fully adult man with a wife and family planning and shit like that, a house, a second channel with like Telosive EV. So, yeah, there's definitely like degrees to those statements.
All seeing kind of the consequences of those influences. The main part being, I think that a lot of people just in general feel like I'm not as easily excitable about Apple products as I used to.
Last in line for iPhone 16, showing skeptical look. While I'm not reviewing Apple Watch Series 10, which I assume is just like, well, for one, he doesn't have. I would argue the worst thing that Drew does these days is just not own certain Apple products, which deprives him, I feel like, of the appreciation for that tech. And it's weird to me because you don't need to own the latest iPad or the latest Apple Watch to like still understand how good those like categories of products are, right? Like I know he got rid of his Apple Watch, which I believe was like a Series 7, right, for like very little money, but like I understand not reviewing the Series 10, but like I feel like you're at that point you're really starting to lose connection to the discourse if you don't have an Apple Watch yourself, you don't review the latest stuff. Like your exposure to the latest stuff becomes actually less and less as you also spend more time on experiments of like using older iPhones and stuff like that. I've criticized him already for stuff like saying iOS 18 has changed for the sake of it. I have argued against that very, very strongly. Stop upgrading just for battery. True, in a way, like obviously you should probably learn some tricks to make your battery last a little longer. Investing in like a power bank with 10,000 milliampere hours will probably improve your battery game way more than like buying any possible smartphone. AirPods 4 details we missed. Okay, that's not negative. Everything you missed, so that's his coverage. I don't think it's meant to say all of these are like more negative, but I guess like some of that here is.
To be, but I think it's fair to say that objectively, Apple is not quite as interesting or as exciting as they used to be.
I disagree. I actually profoundly disagree. I think that individual launches from Apple are not as significant as they used to be. That's because hardware improvements are leveling off. I mean, do I need to show you again? Did I close an NTAC? Unfortunately, no. Do I need to show you that graph? Like a semiconductor, like silicon shrinkage is slower than it was before. Cameras are now larger than they were, but they cannot really become that much larger without really straining optics and stuff like that. Batteries, yes, there are some technologies that make the battery bigger, but at this point, if your device already lasts you all day, even a 50% or even a doubling of battery capacity, well, it would be nice, and I know a lot of people will appreciate it. It will probably not actually change the entire way you use your smartphone. So, but the reason why I actually switched to the browser is this. And that is what I wanted to talk about, primarily when it comes to criticizing Drew, because on the iPad we do have a larger collection of iPads than ever, right? Which you can argue, oh, should the iPad have become a Mac or whatever? Like, there is now plenty of choice. Even something like the Mini will get like access to something like Apple Intelligence. iPad Pro has like a basically revolutionary screen and an absolutely unmatched chip in that form factor, to the point that Apple was willing to go ultra thin, much lighter on the product, right? Like, I don't think there's anything that beats this product. I know like Huawei does like some OLED tablets and stuff like that, but like, come on. Like, really, like, just from an optimized apps perspective, this is such a nice product. And I know I have the M1 iPad Pro, and this is just better. In fact, this one, despite everything that might come together, like a much faster chip, like the use of a higher peak brightness and stuff like that, this device actually has significantly more battery life than my M1 iPad Pro. Um, and so and of course, the iPad category is not even 15 years old. I know, of course, we are talking more like the last decade, but don't forget, iPad 2, new iPad, and then the iPad mini is actually closer to 1 decade. And then the cheaper iPad was introduced way later. And of course, the differentiation between Pros and Airs goes back to like the A9X iPad Pro, right? So there's plenty here that has happened over the last couple of years. Even some of that might be 5 or 6 years. The big iPad Pro redesign of 2018, the ProMotion introduction of 2017, the Apple Silicon introduction of 2021, right? The Tandem OLED introduction of just this year. Like, and before that, stuff like mini LED. Like, there is so much here. With the iPhone, yes, the iPhone is getting updated extremely regularly. So here, actually, I would argue the excitement is probably the lowest, because we probably can predict the best of what is happening. But for example, just around the corner is a brand new iPhone SE with basically a design to match and even beat in some ways like the iPhone 14 and 15. Like, anybody who wants any design changes, the iPhone 16 brought you some. Just before the iPhone 16 Pro, the iPhone 15 Pro introduced certain even design changes and material changes like titanium. The iPhone 17 Pro is rumored to go like again back to aluminum and have like a partially metal back and something like that. So while yes, you can argue, is the 16 series particularly exciting, like as a standout versus other iPhone generations? No, I would argue it's probably pretty similar to something like the iPhone XS series, which it follows a very successful year with a very like reasonable S year upgrade to a degree, and then even introduces some design changes along the way just to not be boring. Um, Apple Watch. Apple Watch, of course, is basically a decade old as a category. Apple Watch Series 10, I know, like, technically has like slightly bigger bezels than like Series 9, but don't forget, Series 7, 8, and 9 had like absolutely impossibly thin bezels. The Ultra 2, it's just the second generation of the Ultra that is basically just 2 years old at this point, right? So again, not just a product category that isn't even that old, but a product category that has seen some significant changes in less than half a decade. Apple Vision Pro, of course, new. Yes, you can argue it's not the best seller ever, but if you have it, some people swear by it, watching movies only with it and stuff like that. Some people stream games through like a Steam client inside Vision Pro, and they swear on like the low latency of the screen and the lack of a screen door effect and things like that. AirPods as a category, also like not too old. When AirPods first gen, when did they come out? AirPods first gen tech specs. Apple usually lists the year as far as I know. No, they don't. AirPods. I'll just look at it. So 2016, less than a decade old. AirPods Pro, actually introduced half a decade ago in 2019. AirPods Pro 2, still getting game-changing features like hearing aid stuff, like which is like so underrated. Like it honestly sometimes bothers me that people don't talk about like AirPods Pro 2 in even more positive ways than they already do. Honestly, I believe this is probably the most exciting software upgrade this year to me from Apple, has like been this focus on like hearing health from AirPods. I know that might sound far-fetched to many people, but I really care about that stuff. adaptive volume and things like that are very important to me. So yeah, you can believe me, you cannot, but I'm very, very excited. TV and home, the Apple TV still remains by far the most fluent and easiest to use, like smart home, like a smart TV thing in the market. Absolutely, to the point that Drew has actually talked about building an actual like Apple TV, because the Apple TV box is so good. So why not bake in those functionalities, maybe even with an M series chip rather than an A series chip, into an expensive, nice TV? HomePod Mini, yeah, nice accessories, not game changing, but also not that old as a category. The Mac, Apple Silicon, 4 years old. The M1 Max, M1 Pro redesign for the MacBook Pro, 3 years old. The M2 MacBook Air redesign, 2.5 years old. Right? You see the pattern. Like, it's not like when we're saying Apple was so good back then. Yeah, of course, stuff is slowing down across the board, except for maybe something like Vision Pro, which is brand new. But like, yeah, there's still plenty to be excited about. Still plenty of people who don't have Apple Silicon Macs and stuff like that. So yeah, just trying to provide some context, basically.
I mean, Apple would tell you the biggest thing that happened this year is Apple Intelligence.
They would advertise this and such, but would you need to agree with them on that? Like I said, like I care a lot about the hearing aid features inside AirPods Pro 2. Like I know people care about like customization in iOS 18, both through the home screen and control center. I know a lot of people care about even like the fun colors of the iPhone 16. I would argue the biggest change this year is undoubtedly the M4 iPad Pro in terms of hardware. Tandem OLED screen, 1000 nits of all-screen brightness, impossibly thin despite actually having longer real-life battery life, all while incorporating Apple's fastest, most efficient M series processor ever. Right? Like, yeah, how can you ignore that? Are you just referring to software? But even then, Apple Intelligence would arguably, to many people, not be the biggest thing that Apple introduced, even in software this year, just the thing most advertised.
And I just don't really feel like I'm being that unreasonable by suggesting that Apple Intelligence is not that big a deal. The biggest change of the year is that Siri moved from being a little flame to being around the screen.
Yeah, that is the comment that honestly made me want to react to the video. What does, like, is that a misspeak? Like, is he saying the biggest thing of Apple Intelligence this year is the redesigned look? Because the redesign is actually better than like the proofreading features and stuff like that, and the chat GPT integration and things like that, Genmoji, image playground, whatever you want, right? Like I don't quite get the exact criticism here, which I know like some people are like to say, oh, Siri is not actually that much newer. I would argue Siri still does all the things most people really wanted to do. I think there's a niche group of consumers that really like Apple to compete in absolute every market. Those are the same people who have asked for Apple to make YouTube competitors and Google search competitors and things like that. And why wasn't Apple first to all like artificial intelligence features? Well, and the reason is that Apple has different focuses. Fundamentally, their biggest focus is on their own hardware and improving the user experience on said hardware.
Animation, but the Siri at the end of the day is the same. A lot of people are hyped for just some basic proofreading features, which has already existed on Grammarly. And
again, it's a separate app. I believe the best features are paywalled, but okay, go on.
the ChatGPT integration, which need I say more? Yeah, we've had ChatGPT for a while now.
By the way, ChatGPT, like good ChatGPT is basically like 18 months old, right? Like, don't act like ChatGPT being integrated across the system is not a big deal in today's environment. I would argue, while it's definitely lesser than in the integration of search engines directly into the browser, it is a genuine experience improver.
There's just a system level way to access it. So on one hand, yes, I do think it's fair to say
I mean,
that
it also combines with actual system level features like Apple's visual intelligence. And Apple's visual intelligence, by the way, because Apple has worked on it prior to Apple Intelligence, it actually does something like flower and dog breed recognition apparently better than like Google's Gemini or ChatGPT often, because those just tend to hallucinate, while Apple's like more custom built solutions, because they predate often that newer wave of AI, seem to be actually better in some ways. So you are actually getting the best of both worlds. You're getting easy integration with visual intelligence to something like basically like reverse photo search on Google. You get Chat GPT, like contextual analysis of everything being shown in the photo, and you got everything that Apple has been building in for the last few years into the Photos app, from like people and text recognition and stuff like that, to certain object recognition. And of course, all of that will soon be more powered by Apple than before.
Apple has quickly run out of noticeable, meaningful design changes in regards to their hardware and software to a certain extent, where they just feel like, how much better can this really get? We're just
I
refining
mean, yeah,
and
the problem is it doesn't have to improve by the same rate to still, for like a tech enthusiast, which I would count Drew as, to still appreciate that Apple is pushing the envelope of like getting the latest node technologies, being very like ambitious with technologies like tandem OLED and micro OLED and stuff like that. There is still a lot happening.
refining, and especially with the case of the iOS 18 Photos app, it feels like change for the sake of change.
It's not. I think that the camera app needs some refinement. I think it needs like the option to go, not to go back, but just that all these other options like need to have like also like a bottom bar, at least as an option. That way you like, I know a lot of people have told me they like to scroll like basically up and down, and this forces them to work a lot more horizontally than previously vertically. And while I think that the biggest complaint here is arguably like that your muscle memory doesn't like the changes, I have actually grown to really like a lot of the changes in the Photos app.
Something wrong with the old Photos app? Did it need to be switched around so
I
much?
mean, at that point, though, you are arguing for actual slowdown of changes, right? If you're saying that whenever an engineer has like a decent idea that people internally agree on, they should never implement it because, oh, what was before wasn't broken. At that point, nothing will change. I mean, that stovetop like tri-camera design is not broken. It definitely didn't prevent them ever from selling new iPhones, going back to the iPhone 11 Pro series, right? But you do want them to change. You said how the iPhone is so wobbly, like if you put it on a table and stuff like that. Like, yeah, that's not broken. Similar to how the Photos app was not broken, but arguably made it difficult to access certain very specific like albums and stuff, while this redesign makes that easier. So yeah, again, like it's really, it's complaint for complaint's sake, I would argue, with the Photos app. You can learn it. It's not that
Probably
difficult.
not, but Craig likely felt like, well, we don't have enough things to talk about it.
That's not how it works. I promise you that month long redesign, sometimes like ideas that were like years like suggested like years ago, like, yeah, that is not what happens. Apple doesn't say, oh, we need more features for iOS 18. If anything, Apple would arguably be happy to have some fewer features, but they also know, well, we do have those features in the work. We do want to release them at some point, because as we transition to focusing a little bit more on Apple Intelligence, we actually don't even know how much time and effort we can then put into that Photos app. We might launch the new design now, get customer feedback, change it ever so slightly over the next year, but focus most of our new development on something else. I mean, it's very like I don't like this perspective where you feel like, oh, they're just doing it for the fun of it.
So let's just change it, and people are going to complain about all the changes, and then we can spend a year fixing all of the things we broke. So that's one side of the coin.
Broke
It's like, yes,
is
I
such
do
a
think
bad
Apple
word
as a company
here.
has matured. Their tech has kind of plateaued in regards to noticeable year-over-year
Yeah,
changes. And
by the
that's
way,
what
it's not the tech that has plateaued, it's the rate of improvements that has plateaued, right? Because obviously the tech is getting better. So I just wanted to make that
we're getting more
clarifier.
things like the camera control button. Did anyone really ask for that? Did we really need it?
Yes, why? Why not? We have the action button, which is customizable, but it really is not in a great spot. It really is not a big button for camera stuff. You can argue, does camera control need all that like swipey gestures and things like that? Probably not. It could be just a simple extra shutter button that could be taller and things like that. You can argue that it could be improved, but or even it could be like made dumber but better in a way. But it also gives you access to stuff like visual intelligence now, which actually gives you Apple such a big advantage in the number of buttons and hardware-based shortcuts. Like you can do double and triple tap gestures on the back. You can do, of course, you can do regular click, press, double click, and triple click on the home button, on the power button. I wish the action button at the double click, but it does have long press. Right, so you have such an advantage over many Android phones that come out with only a power button, no action button or volume switcher, and even with a volume switcher, it never feels as good as Apple or OnePlus usually. No dedicated camera shutters. Shout out to Sony, who has had one for years and years. I've always praised them for that. So yeah, just a little weird to complain about new stuff.
Is it helping the iPhone experience substantially?
Yes,
No.
iPhones are very often used as cameras. Now with Apple Intelligence, Apple wants to push like you like basically scanning text and stuff like that easier instead of doing it in the Photos app. Regularly do it through visual intelligence, do it through camera control.
Not really. In fact, I think it's the next 3D Touch. I think they're going to get rid of it in a few generations.
Which is also a weird perspective because 3D Touch was great. 3D Touch removal was bad. It was not the problem of 3D Touch. It was the lack of adoption of 3D Touch.
But the other side of the coin, how have I changed as a person? That's the question Alex was initially asking, right? For me to be more introspective. And what I think has fundamentally changed that I've been thinking about all day before I started recording this video is that when I was younger and I didn't have that many responsibilities as a child, you know, when I started this channel, I was in high school.
This is actually interesting
really have a
and
full-time
correct.
jobs income. I had like side jobs.
Now,
here and
of
there,
course, to me, YouTube is a hobby. I do have my desires to become a full-fledged dermatologist and stuff like that. So putting my med school education to use and things like that. While I do like YouTube, and maybe if at some point it gets really successful, I could consider maybe doing it like half-time, maybe working from the morning to the early afternoon. As a doctor, and then doing like a daily or a once every 2 days, like a longer 4 or 5 hour stream, just covering everything that's coming up and stuff like that. This doesn't seem to be in the cards money wise. Like seems like definitely my real job will bring in a lot more money than YouTube. I know he's of course a professional YouTuber, but even he had to get like a side gig. I would argue that he doesn't really produce enough content, unfortunately, to complain too much about like needing extra money. It's not just that YouTube has slowed down, which will be a point later on, but you definitely need to create more content. Like before we continue with the video, let's actually Tylos of Tech. Right, so how often does he do videos? And again, this isn't a criticism of Drew. I'm doing this because it's in like the last video he made was over a week ago. Then he had actually a very fun video about wanting a dedicated TV. I believe that one I actually reacted to. Then he covered other rumors and stuff like that. So he is prolific still, but I would argue with all the devices that have come out, like he would have bought something like the Mac Mini in the past to just make sure, oh, there's an unboxing video on the channel, there's like a first review, and there are also some like let me just cover
all the money I generated from mowing lawns or working at a mandarin
really
ranch or doing
fully.
wedding videos and freelance photography and videography and that kind of thing was all of this money I make I get to spend on some cool tech because I loved tech and I love the way it was changing rapidly over time. Just the sheer number of differences between the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 10, oh my gosh. But yeah, even before that, you know, know, the iMacs were getting big redesigns more often, and the MacBook Pros were changing substantially with the push towards USB-C. You know, when I first started this tech channel, there was no USB-C, there was no touch bar, and I witnessed
True.
Apple do these radical rethinkings of product design by getting rid of the home button on the iPad, or introducing higher refresh rate displays, or the introduction of AirPods, which didn't exist when I started this channel. So there were some rapid, really interesting changes in the consumer tech world that we witnessed during the first 10 years of this channel's existence. And because I had so little responsibilities in my life outside of I'm going to make some money and I'm going to spend it on things that are exciting and interesting to me, which involved iPhones, cameras, computers, because the tech channel basically motivated me to spend more money on new tech.
Yeah, but you understand, you don't actually. This is where I will criticize YouTubers who are entirely against any form of sponsors, because you can use sponsors very effectively. Like, I think the way Drew did it for the iPhone 16 Pro, where he put in like a case advertisement in the video, but then still got to do a completely neutral iPhone 16 Pro review and got to keep it. I would argue that's financially extremely smart, and it doesn't hurt your audience. The audience can still read up on like that specific product you advertise. Don't lie to them. Don't work with companies that are known to have a bad reputation. But yeah, these days you have enough subscribers, you have enough regular viewers, you have enough support by the community to do a lot of these reviews in a very financially responsible way. Like, I'm sure Samsung wouldn't mind sending you a product from time to time, or you cooperate with some like Apple Watch band company and they buy you like the latest Apple Watch and stuff like that. So there is some stuff that you could be doing. I mean, even for iPads, like context freaking Logitech, ask them to like review to like advertise their keyboards. They're actually pretty good, and stuff like that. And let's see if they can halfway finance an iPad for you, or maybe just even get you an iPad M4 for review or something like that. That's all absolutely possible.
Products, because then I could make more videos and hopefully those videos would perform well, make more money. It turned into this very Apple sheep positive feedback loop where my brain was probably like heavily influenced by the dopamine hit of YouTube videos doing well, and simultaneously there's a huge dopamine hit that comes from buying any new tech product, unboxing it, just the sheer screen peeling sound. And because of that feedback loop, there was like
True, that is one thing that has gotten less satisfying over the years.
Buying the latest iPad, buying the latest iPhone and Mac, and then I used the lawyer side of my brain, the Apple sheep defense lawyer, to defend all of these purchases, which in a lot of ways I could justify as a work expense, you know, because...
And that is my question. You have a 2-week like return policy. Like, I understand sometimes it would probably go wrong, but you don't need to keep all of those products. Actually, you can make, let's say, $1,500 on the videos, even let's say they aren't that successful by your standards, right? And then you can resell the device for like 70-80% of the pricing still, right? Or you can create giveaways for your community that would arguably spike up demand for for more videos and stuff like that. There's a lot that you can do, and I'm not teaching him to be a YouTuber. Believe me, I'm a streamer right now with less than 10 viewers, but I fully understand the criticism. To me, like when it comes to like, oh, can you criticize everyone? Like, are you the next MKBHD or whatever? No, but the point is, this is actually friendly advice because I really like Drew. I really like a lot of his content. So I just find it weird when sometimes he'll be like, oh, I had to keep it. I convinced myself to keep it. Yeah, but that was in your youthful days. You can still do all the reviews, all the unboxings without keeping a product. That still works.
Was something I would use for my channel, and then I could justify it as, well, I need this for my future. I need this for the channel to continue to make money and continue to grow. So that's how I justified it. And I just kept buying and kept buying. And after I would buy, especially if I found something that I thought was beautiful and fun to hold and easy to compliment on camera, basically if it made for good content, I could justify the expense. But as I've gotten older and realized how many other responsibilities responsibilities I have in my life, not just for myself, but for friends or family members that I care about, or thinking about my long-term future and putting money aside for when I'm older or unable to make YouTube videos, or perhaps not even that, YouTube could just fundamentally change in some regard. And we've actually already seen that more recently, YouTube losing a lot of screen time and audience retention to short form content, whether that be Instagram Reels.
True, and I could tell him like in a very stupid way of like, oh, go to TikTok, but TikTok actually makes very very little money, but it does suck away like basically engagement from YouTube. This is why YouTube has introduced stuff like YouTube Shorts and stuff like that, which also do make very little money. So while if with TikTok you at least would have the advantage, oh my god, people come in to watch my short form content on TikTok. Let me just try to siphon as many of them over to my long form content on YouTube. Now people come even to YouTube and just watch short form content. It's really bad.
TikTok or YouTube Shorts, that's where viewership is headed, and that has had a very noticeable effect. You can ask any major tech YouTuber what their AdSense has looked like in the past couple years compared to 5 to 10 years ago. It's changed.
True, even like from 2 years ago, my when I first became when did I became first eligible? That was about a year ago for AdSense. It has gone down per view. Like, of course, I do have more views and stuff like that in general, but yeah, overall, yeah, I understand that. Like per click, per view, it's definitely bad.
10,000 views on YouTube is not what it used to be. And simple policy changes like that have made me think like, yeah, I want to keep doing videos like this, but I need to protect myself financially in the long run. And sure, a lot of that wisdom probably came from getting married and getting my wife's perspective on finances, because she clearly was not as big of an Apple sheep as I was, even though she loved her MacBooks and her iPhones and she was happy to review them, and she has no interest in switching to Android right now. Trust me, I've checked. But becoming more of an adult with retirement accounts and savings and realizing what the cost of living is and how it's going up with inflation and this growing
The
gap.
problem is all of those things sound more like they're probably pushing more on like your general like excitement for everything rather than specifically your excitement for technology. Like I know I don't have the time I used to have to like check out all the tech news and stuff like that. It's just again like not anything against Drew or against getting older, getting more responsible, but it doesn't have to be that way, especially as a YouTuber. Like, granted, he does have another job now too, so that probably plays into it.
Between cost of living and average income, I think that all has played a factor on me now, where I no longer am looking at tech products as, oh, this is a form of artwork, or this is something that I really love because it's the shiny new toy. Now let me think backwards on how I can justify this expense by saying, well, it's for my channel. Now, instead, I think it's inverse. It's, I appreciate the tech and I'm willing to talk about it. I love talking about leaks and rumors, and I love diving into what Apple's next move is or what Apple's current moves are. But I still very much plan on covering all of that stuff on this channel along with Apple events as they happen in real time. So much more fun to live stream my reaction than it is to sit in silence or to read about it after the fact. I love getting your guys' opinion on it as well, but when it comes to the actual, do I need this? That's where a different perspective is certainly now in my brain, where it's like, if I can't justify it before the purchase takes place, then I'm not going to try it as often, or I'm not going to give it much of a chance, or I'm not going to purchase it in the first place. And I think the latest generation Mac Mini is a classic example. It's not a very expensive Mac. I could easily justify it and say, oh yeah, I'll make a few videos on it, so I guess it's worth the expense, because doesn't it technically pay for itself after just a couple of videos? But now that I have other responsibilities in my life and I have other financial goals I want to hit, it's made me realize like, yeah, but if I'm spending time and money on a product and just hoping to break even once I post the videos about it, I'm still not actually making any money, which I'm not really.
The problem is though, if you don't make any videos, you don't make any money in general. Like, and I know even for myself, like not posting regular content has hurt me a lot in the YouTube algorithm over like the last 2-3 weeks after like the Apple events. Not only has excitement in general died down, but I know a lot of people like just like don't get even notifications for my shit and stuff like that. And I'm to blame because I knew that about the algorithm, but I still chose to stream less frequently. I still chose to like stream arguably less. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but you have to make those considerations, and yes, you have to make them carefully. But if you can get the Mac Mini and over 2 weeks, let's say you produced just 2 videos on it, and you sent it back and get your full money back, have you really lost anything, in my opinion?
In this job for the money, but life does cost something
Yeah,
now
of
to live. I've
course.
got to feed people. I've got property taxes. I've got income
Yeah,
tax. I've got
California
people in my
is
life that I want to make sure I can take care
California is
of, and
hard,
of course
man.
live comfortably so that I can have food and that I can travel to visit my friends and family, which live all over the world. I've got family
Honestly, with the huge exodus of people from California to states like Florida. By the way, I agree with the relatively high taxes of California. I don't quite agree with how they're spending it. But I do believe that if there were like a European style social democracy with like a full featured healthcare system, relatively low like rates of homelessness and stuff like that. Yeah, but I am a center left liberal, by the way. Like, there's no way liberal to leftist, depending on the specific policy we are talking about. But like, yeah, I understand that for people like Droop, like, man, living in Florida, like, you would be getting, for example, right now you would be paying like at least 10-15% fewer taxes, and your cost of living would likely be significantly lower too. Damn. And I say that who would much more prefer to live alongside Democrats in a state like California than mostly Republicans in a state like Florida. So yeah, but I'm a dirty European. What do I know anyway?
that we're visiting soon, and I guess that change in lifestyle perhaps has made me not so quick to jump on any Apple purchase. And I've definitely noticed that still present in tech communities, in personalities in the YouTube space, where they will buy the product and then come up with reasons to justify that expense. Whereas I think what more
Yeah, I would argue I've seen that a lot with like the Mac Studio, like the Ultra chip, where a lot of like YouTube content creators like got themselves like the most expensive Mac Studio, where like you could argue that yeah, maybe a Mac Studio would is a good purchase for them, but did they really need more than the M2 Max? Especially if a year later they already upgraded in a way to the M3 Max MacBook Pro, and then a year later to the M4 Max MacBook Pro, and now they're awaiting the M4 Ultra MacBook Mac Studio. But at that point, the M5 Max MacBook Pro will not be too far away. So yeah, that like I understand the criticism here. I would argue some of them also make like videos on those choices. So if you are like a Greg's Gadgets or a Luke Miami, and you get like a solid like 200K views per video, you probably can justify keeping that. You also, of course, get to keep that tag, which empowers you to make comparison videos further on. It empowers you to make like half a year later, 1 year later videos. So it's not like the expense has to be even paid off in just the first week or two. You definitely have a lot of opportunity later on. Plus, again, you can sell your old stuff. You can like hand it down, which again I know is not actually money coming back to your pocket, but it prevents maybe somebody who you care about spending money, which is also worth something. So just saying, they don't just justify it for the Apple sheep justification. They justify it because partially they know not only can they pay for it, but they can more than pay for it down the
responsible
line.
consumers should be doing is before they buy the product, ask themselves, do they need this? Should they make this purchase? Rather than try to justify it after the fact. So I do apologize if you missed the older Drew and you're kind of like, man, there were those days where Drew would go out and buy the latest Mac Mini because he likes that it's redesigned. And that's true, I do. I really appreciate how much performance and power they were able to pack in such an affordable purchase. And yet I keep asking myself before I go out and review one, what would I use it for? What do I really need it for that I can't do already with my existing ecosystem? And I really tried to find a use case for it. I tried to find a justification that would make me say, oh, okay, I could use my Mac Mini for this,
2-week
therefore
return?
I can justify the purchase, so I'm going to go out
Am
and
I
buy
wrong
one.
in
And I
any
couldn't
of
do it. I
that?
really tried. I realized,
Especially
no, I'm
now around the
traveling so much
Christmas
now
season.
that a
He could
stationary
buy
Mac is
anything
just
he
not
wanted. I
gonna be
believe
that
the
useful, and I
return
can
season
easily
is
turn my MacBook Pro into a desktop at any
Apple
time. And it's got an HDMI port. It's got USB-C ports. I
policy.
could just plug it into an external monitor and boom, it's now just like using a desktop, or it's just like using a Mac Mini. Rewind the clocks back to before I was married, before I had as many responsibilities as I do now.
You have 14
You'll remember way
calendar
back in
days to return an
I bought
item
the
from the
recently
day you
refreshed
received it. A good vlog. Take care. I gotta go. Thank you so much for joining. There's 67. Yeah, I'll probably be wrapping it out soon anyway. Didn't actually expect it to make it a 2-hour video today. My voice is giving up. I am slightly under the weather, so thank you anyone who found the time and the energy to join, because I'm slowly losing out on my energy. So you have 14 calendar days to return an item from the day you received it. Only items that have been purchased directly from Apple. That's not bad. Drew always drives to the store. Please ensure that the item you're returning is repackaged with all the cords, adapters, and documentations. They're ineligible to return. Okay, you cannot return open software, software download, software up-to-date program, app, and Apple developer products. Yeah, that, like, I have to say, like, you can do a lot in 14 days. The reason why I don't do like buy stuff, review it, and then like return it is because I honestly don't, like, I could easily miss out on the 14 calendar days because I am so freaking busy with stuff outside of this channel. So this is why, like, but if you are a professional YouTuber, if you have like a whole like infrastructure created around buying and reviewing products, like, not taking advantage of that is a little questionable to me.
Base gray for the first time Mac Mini, because I liked that it finally had USB-C ports on the back. I liked that it was in this new shade of color that it hadn't been in before. And of course, the Apple sheep side of my brain was just like, cool, pretty looking Mac Mini. Let's go out and buy that. I spent like $1,100 on an Intel-based Mac Mini way back when, and I said, I'll buy it so I can review it, and then I'll find a justification for it later. And I tried to justify it as, well, this is my live streaming Mac, so I will edit on my iMac Pro, and then I will live stream on my Mac Mini. The truth was, did I really need a whole separate Mac just to do live streaming? How many live streams would I have to do to actually pay for
it's a
that
clean
Mac Mini?
setup,
5,
though, and you
10,
can
but now those are
arguably,
all sunk cost
if your
live
Mac
streams
is
where
good
all of
for
the money
streaming
generated
now,
from your
it will
guys'
probably
generosity, which I
stay
never
so
wanna
for
take
like the
granted,
next
or the
decade or
AdSense from the
more.
ads that played on those live streams. All of that revenue just goes towards paying the bill of a product that I probably didn't need in the first place. So because I don't want to take you guys for granted, and because the tech space has changed a lot, and honestly, most of my best performing videos are usually not about a product I purchased. It's usually about a narrative I have or an idea I have, which is why, unfortunately, I'm not going to be buying and keeping a Mac Mini. I would love to review an M4 Mac Mini at some point, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I don't have much to say about it other than I love the design and I love the specs, but you guys know the performance
I mean,
tests.
you could
guys know
create
how
a fun
affordable it
skit
is. What
around
good
it
is
in
me
your
unboxing
review.
it and
Like,
setting it up
there's
with my
stuff
external
that
monitor
people
really
watch
gonna
you
do at the end
for.
of the day, other than
You aren't
just
as
make me go, wow,
weren't
it's
as
beautiful,
successful
this
as
is
you
really
are
cool, but I
for
can't
no
justify it, so
reason.
I'm not keeping it. So maybe this channel is going to be a lot more narrative focused over the next 10 years and not so much product review focused, unless I really can find a justification for the product's existence, or there's a lot of new changes with the product, so there's a lot more for me to add to the conversation, like with Apple Vision Pro. Even though I had no need to keep it, there was a whole lot of new experiences and new things to say about it, so that's
True.
why it was certainly worth reviewing. But I hope this video kind of gave you guys some perspective on why I have changed and also why Apple has changed. Technology can't improve exponentially forever. At a certain point, it just turns into incremental, small, minor year-over-year upgrades, and I've tried reviewing older phones, which has been fun, but there's, again, a limited number of them, and only so much you can say. How many different ways can you phrase, this is pretty good, and it still works? So I guess
True.
what I'm trying to say is you might find the more
I know this
recent
is like
tech
the least
content or the
hard to
newer tech
react
coverage
that I've
more
done, but I've reacted a lot in the beginning. Now he's talking about his personal life, his personal choices. There's very reason for me to be hypercritical of any of this. Again, still want to argue that the 14-day return policy arguably allows him to keep doing his more impulsive stuff. Like, I know in the past he used to do a lot more videos, even from like one product. That would usually mean keeping it for longer than 2 weeks. That would usually mean that he would have to justify actually spending the money. But right now it would be spending the money, and over the course of 1 month you get the money fully back.
boring as Apple just gets into the rhythm of doing M4 and then M5 and then M6 and then M7, and each chip is just a little faster than.
I mean, but that's also not fair. Like, for one, M1 came out, and then 1 year later we got the redesigned MacBook Pros with all those return of ports, better thickness and stuff like that, mini LED promotion. That was just 3 years ago. From that point, we've doubled like peak brightness on the display. We've improved response time. So even there we have improved. That's even before we get technology like tandem OLED. Hopefully sooner than later on the MacBook. You got the introduction of the Mac Studio as a new form factor. We got the introduction of chips going as far up as M1, M2 Ultra. we got like the Mac Mini redesign, the MacBook Air redesign. Like there is so much that has happened that isn't just like, oh, the chip got slightly upgraded. Then I'm always getting confused by that narrative. It's just not true.
Before, but all I'm trying to say is it's not purely my fault if you might be a bit more bored. I will try my best with more comedic skits and comedic timing to make the videos more interesting, but at the end of the day, if the subject matter itself is getting less and less interesting over time, there's only so much we can do as content creators to hold your attention, and I just think it's worth mentioning on video that, yeah, it is challenging to keep this stuff interesting over time. I'm not going to be one of those content creators that tries to act like every year is a bigger and bigger deal for the iPhone or the iPad or the MacBook, and act like everything Apple does is, oh, this is the biggest thing ever to happen in the history of Apple. Yeah, no, let's be honest here. I think if I got one thing going for me on this channel, it's the honesty and the integrity, and that's what I'm going to try to hold on to here.
That's true. I've always cared a lot about Drew's like perspective in that regard. Like he's always been like at least saying it the way he is. And Steve, I always forget that it's just Steve. Sometimes I see the names, I believe, when like there's like renewal stuff for like YouTube memberships or whatever. It just says like the name with all the numbers and letters that I know YouTube generates for that shit. But yes, Steve saying hi. Steve, unfortunately, you're joining pretty late because we are soon wrapping it up. It is now an over 2-hour stream, but yeah, thank you so much for joining. I know that like we technically now get all the MarkTech Pro Max supporters combined here, but yeah, thank you so much. And bye. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know that it's hard to align schedules. This is why I usually like streaming on the weekends, but yeah, what can you do, right? You find time
Even
whenever
if you
you
get
can.
bored.
You hope that the video will find some traction afterwards. I know recently it has been really hard to get like people to watch a live stream. I'll try to work on something else, but honestly, I'm so busy over the next 3-4 months that it's really hard to say.
Because I'm not going out and buying the latest color option of every iPhone 16 just to tell you, ooh, this looks pretty. I'm just going to tell you where my headspace is at with the tech community as a whole and what makes sense as far as a tech purchase in my personal life. So if you want to unsubscribe because of that perspective, I totally understand. No faults to you. And thank you, Alex, for the question. I really appreciate people who are willing to suggest ideas rather than just shoot down the ones that I can come up with, because there's certainly a lot of tech routes where it becomes challenging to find topics that are worth talking about. So thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. It seriously helps me out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.
Thank you, Drew. Again, I wanted to react to this not because this is like the most viral tech video ever. I think that honestly it does bring up some good points about like personal growth, personal responsibility, change in life. While I think I brought up some decent points, I don't need to summarize them all. But like again, 14-day return policy exists, sponsorships exist. I think that Drew has leveraged them quite well. The one time he's actually done it, where was it? Like, where's his iPhone 16 Pro review? Last line for iPhones. Here, iPhone 16 Pro Max review. Right, look at it. 30,000 videos. It's a sponsor video that I believe 80 or 90% paid for the iPhone 16 Pro Max, plus cases. So it outperformed. Rumors begin for Vision Pro. Don't buy MacBook Pros. MKBHD's shoes. Give Marquez a break. Underperformed the AirPods 4 review, which again is a product he ended up buying. Last in line for iPhone 16, one of his more successful recent videos is him buying an iPhone 16. One of his less performant views is on a video on why he is not buying something. And telling people not to upgrade. While, yeah, covering leaks, rumors, reviewing even software does decently well. Be careful what you send me, True. The best iPhone is 5 months away. Telling people that the iPhone SE is the best iPhone is weird. So, yeah, I'm not surprised that it didn't get, like, the highest viewership. And then he talked, of course, about the M4 Max. That brought in a lot of viewership and stuff like defense for the M4 Mac Mini. That's also something, by the way, I do want to cover at some point. I want to make a video that really underscores that I believe that some of the decisions underpinning like the M4 family and especially the Mac Mini really are Apple's future, but I'll have to find some other way to make that point. This TV video is actually very successful, I would argue, for a quickly produced 5-minute video. He probably could do well by making this like a short. I think that his skits would work pretty well for that. And again, I am saying this from like not a I'm a better YouTuber perspective, but just I'm saying that there is opportunity to maximize here pretty easily without like spending too much more money and stuff like that. And here, like, because he had the iPhone 15 Pro, he was able to do a 9 months later video and things like that. So yeah, and probably paid for like a huge part of it at that point. Apple Watch 10 is just big. Okay, so you can see that a lot of different perspectives can work. A lot of different ways can work, but yeah, like he has responded to everything. He's a prolific YouTuber. He is an OG, absolutely. But I'm just trying to say there is opportunity here to be a bigger YouTuber without compromising on your morals, without compromising significantly on the time for your other job and stuff like that. There is opportunity here to keep buying product without actually spending too much money on it. So absolutely love Drew, but just wanted to clarify some points. And yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I know it was like a surprise stream at this point. I don't have the slightest idea what my actual schedule is, but we've talked everything from like TSMC's roadmap and what it means for Apple devices and products and even their servers. Again, Samsung's S25 Ultra is leaked. I guess I don't have that much more to say about it, and I just don't really like it. You, of course, can let me know how you feel about it. One UI 7, there's more and more stuff showing up. Basically, it's very iOS-y. It's not quite the blatant theft of ideas and designs that Samsung, that like Oppo's ColorOS is or something like that, but it's still pretty like live activities and control center redesigny, and icons are trying to be a little bit more similar. And again, I just don't like how this website structures certain smaller articles like that. We've talked about my own past with devices that I have owned and small stuff that I'm buying for myself, like the Grid iPhone 3GS, basically framed. And we reacted, I think, to a pretty interesting video from Drew from Talos of Tech. Hopefully he doesn't have a problem with us reacting to it. But yeah, that's about it for today's video. Thank you so much for joining. As always, let me know what you would like to see me cover next. Do all the YouTube jazz before you leave. Don't have to give you all the details again. Thank you so much, guys. I'll see you next time. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.